everything. If I could inspire just one person, that would be awesome.
Line agreements here, but the real work remains, and I wonder if you think there might be a need for another. Is this the last CR that we're going to see this fiscal year?
Far be it from me to predict the last CR. I've been around here a few years, and I've never seen one quite like this. What's happened over in the House of Representatives is unprecedented. 15 ballots for one speaker who is then removed, another speaker who emerges after days of mystery negotiations. I don't know Mike Johnson. I wish him the very best as Speaker of the House of Representatives. I think he's doing the right thing, buying a week or two to finish this off, but let's get it done.
Well, Senator, do you also think he's doing the right thing, not putting the aid package passed by the Senate on the floor of the House that would provide funding to allies like Ukraine and Israel, or is this going to require a discharge petition?
Well, I can tell you the discharge petition is a theory that very seldom happens. I hope that people come to their senses. If this measure, this bipartisan measure that we passed in the Senate to deal with the defense supplemental is brought up for a vote in the House of Representatives, I believe it will pass. I think there's bipartisan support for it. But he has to have the courage to defy some of the extreme members in the Republican caucus and bring it up for a vote. I certainly hope he does.
Well, let's stay in the reality lane for a minute then, Senator, because we know what we've heard from Speaker Johnson, and we know that you want to see that money get to Ukraine, Israel, and Taiwan. If we're in a world in which a discharge petition is a fantasy, and I think that's what you're suggesting, there is another approach in the House that might bring a separate bill with defense-only money, whether or not there's a special mechanism to bring it to the floor. If that was the best version you got in the Senate, would you vote for it?
I'd be troubled by it because there's a provision in our bill for humanitarian assistance, which is absolutely life or death essential in Gaza and critical places around the world. And to send just the military side of it and ignore the reality of the humanitarian nightmare taking place in Gaza is a serious, serious mistake. We need to put the whole measure before the House, let them vote. I believe there'll be a strong bipartisan majority for them.
Well, speaking of a bipartisan view on this issue, of course, on the other side of the aisle in your chamber, the Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell has been a vocal advocate for aiding Ukraine. And of course, he told the world yesterday he will no longer be the Republican leader in the Senate after the election in November. I'd like you to just listen to part of what Senator McConnell said on the floor yesterday, and I'll have you respond.
I know the politics within my party at this particular moment in time. I have many faults. Misunderstanding politics is not one of them. That said, I believe more strongly than ever that America's global leadership is essential to preserving the shining city on a hill that Ronald Reagan discussed.
Senator, he spoke about awareness of the politics in his party and being aware of those politics and who potentially could replace him as leader. Who would bring the greatest chance of bipartisan cooperation with Democrats?
You know, there are three people who were mentioned, and they're currently in leadership on the Republican side: John Thune, John Cornyn, and John Barrasso. I've worked with all three of them. I can work with them in the future. So if they turn out to generate the leader of their party in the United States Senate, I think it'll be a positive thing. But it's up to the Republicans. They may choose one of those or someone else. The bottom line is we need to work on a bipartisan basis to solve the problems of this country. You talked earlier in one of your programs about the border crisis. It does exist. We had a bipartisan response put together, brought to the floor just a few weeks ago, asking the Republicans to join us in an effort to pass it, to make some progress. It was endorsed by the Border Patrol agents, endorsed by the Wall Street Journal, and they rejected it. They wouldn't move forward. We need someone who will accept a good bipartisan compromise that moves us forward as a nation on our border and on many other areas.
The border seems to creep its way into just about every issue that we talk about, certainly every attempt at policy making, at lawmaking. Senator Durbin, I wonder what you can tell us about this effort to not only have Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas impeached, but have a trial to convict him in the Senate. The conventional wisdom is that it will die a quiet death in your chamber, but how?
Well, there are various ways to do it. It is a political stunt by the House of Representatives and really tells us the story of why we have a problem. Instead of dealing with the budget, keeping the lights on for a full fiscal year, they went off and impeached the Secretary of Homeland Security. There was no basis for that. No high crime or misdemeanor was even alleged in this situation. They wasted their time on it, and it's a waste of time in the Senate. I hope we spend very little time with that. Let's roll up our sleeves on a bipartisan basis and start solving problems instead of political stunts.
Well, as we talk about the border, obviously we saw President Biden and former President Trump on the border in Texas, which is a border state, yesterday, and yet we've heard language from the likes of Speaker Mike Johnson just today that every state right now is a border state because of the way migrants are moving through the country, including to major Democratic stronghold cities like New York and also Chicago. Senator, what are you seeing in real time on the ground at home?
It's a struggle. The governor of Texas is dumping off families in the dark of night many times in remote areas of my state, and they're finding their way into Chicago under desperate circumstances. One little boy recently died after he arrived. I mean, it's a terrible humanitarian situation brought on unnecessarily by the governor of Texas. But it does reflect the fact that the border needs to be changed and the laws need to be changed on the border. President Biden has said that. He's working on a bipartisan basis on a bill. But unfortunately, Donald Trump, former President Trump, has said clearly he doesn't want to move forward in that. And he said very clearly, please blame me for stopping this bill, this bipartisan bill, from moving forward. Well, I'm going to do that. I'm going to blame him for stopping at least progress that needs to be made at the border immediately.
Well, is Illinois a border state? And I'm not talking about Wisconsin, Senator.
Well, I can tell you that, we are a nation of immigrants. We are a state of immigrants, and they've done a remarkable job in making this the nation it is today. My mother was an immigrant to this country. I'm very proud of that fact. But we cannot accept everyone who wants to come into the United States at this moment. We need an orderly process at the border. We need to accept those who are no threat to us and make us a stronger nation. Unfortunately, the situation can't move forward unless we have something like this bipartisan bill that was agreed to with Senator Langford, Republican of Oklahoma, Senator Murphy, a Democrat of Connecticut, an independent senator from Arizona. And she's been a critical element in this whole process.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and you mentioned that you do cast blame on former President Donald Trump for disrupting that future progress on that specific measure. On the subject of former President Trump, it was this time yesterday when we got news from the Supreme Court that they will hear his immunity question, where he claims immunity from prosecution here in Washington in Jack Smith's 2020 election interference case. Do you view that as a political move by this court, knowing it could potentially delay his trial so that it does not take place before Election Day?
Well, it is an interesting coincidence that they have delayed this for 2 months, and they make it almost impossible to resolve all of his indictments before the date of the upcoming election. But this issue has to be resolved, and he raised it. He believes that as president, he somehow has a do not go to jail card forever. I don't believe that's true, and I hope the court doesn't find it that way.
Well, Senator, of course, as chairman, you were in the room for the hearings that confirmed the 3 justices that came in the Trump administration. Were you aware at the time? I know these were difficult hearings. I watched them all. Were you aware at the time that you were sowing the seeds for a decision like this?
No, I didn't think this would happen. But, these nominees for Supreme Court justices make very passive and neutral statements. They don't want to be pinned down on anything. The fact is, once they've taken the oath of office to serve for life, the real visions of their views of America start coming before the voters from one end to the other. In this situation, we learn a lot more about the justices after they're sworn in.
Well, and of course, those are just the 3 justices that were appointed and confirmed during Trump's administration. There is another justice, though, that you have taken issue with, Justice Clarence Thomas, whose wife, Ginny Thomas, is actually involved in many of these 2020 electoral questions. You have called for his recusal in a number of these cases as a result. He heard the arguments on the 14th Amendment question. We haven't gotten any real sign that he plans to recuse himself from the case they will hear in April as it relates to immunity. Is there anything, Senator, you can do to change that?
No, of course not. Impeachment is out of the question. It's not going to happen. But the fact of the matter is, it's a conflict of interest for Clarence Thomas to sit on some of these cases after his wife was personally and directly involved in negotiating with the highest levels of the White House during this controversy. He should step aside for the good of the court and his own reputation.
Senator, you've been a creature of the upper chamber for some time. I wonder, with everything that we've been talking about, the potential leadership battle for the Republican conference in the Senate, the possibility of Donald Trump being elected again, even if he isn't, the heavy hand that he's held over Capitol Hill. Do you fear the Senate will soon start looking and feeling like the House?
I'm afraid that it might. There are some elements in the Senate even today that harken back to the approach of politics of Donald Trump. You did a story on a show just right before I came on where they did a survey and said that a large percentage of the population was afraid to vote for Donald Trump because he was dangerous. I've been around politics a number of years. I can never remember a major candidate for president of the United States being characterized as dangerous by voters across the United States, but that is the reality. When Donald Trump says either inject or drink a bottle of bleach to avoid COVID, or invites NATO allies to be attacked by Vladimir Putin, it is dangerous. And I think the American people are aware of that reality. I hope that doesn't infect the United States Senate.
Senator, we have less than a minute left, but that same poll actually found a greater share of voters find President Biden too old. Is enough being done to counter that message?
I'm sure that Joe Biden would like to be younger tomorrow, but he doesn't have the power to do that. I would trust his judgment and his stamina over a dangerous candidate for president any day.
Senator, we appreciate your spending time with us this evening. Dick Durbin of Illinois with us from Capitol Hill. We hope you get home this evening, Senator. Come back and see us again soon. Coming up, we'll be joined by Congresswoman Nicole Malliotakis, the Republican from New York, weighing in on these same issues. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio.
The world needs ways to reduce carbon emissions.
We're working on solutions for our business.
Like carbon capture.
That can also help businesses like yours.
Heavy industry with low emissions. Let's deliver.
Can AI make chatbots act like your very own personal assistant? Yes, with ServiceNow.
Cryptocurrencies had its critics and still has many critics. Blockchain, nobody seems to be against that as a concept, depending whether you use it properly or not. So you are still fairly bullish on blockchain technology?
Yeah, I've been a bit of a skeptic on cryptocurrencies themselves since inception, and in some ways proven wrong regularly as they have gained in interest and activity. But I've always been of the belief that distributed ledger technology or blockchain technology has applications in the financial services world that as yet are still underexploited.
Do you have a view on whether digital currency authorized by a government is a good thing or not? And do you think the United States is going to be at the leadership of that or following other countries?
It depends. So the benefits of a digital currency backed by a government are potentially greater ease of execution of transactions and greater visibility. If you use the central bank digital currency to intrude upon the privacy of the individual citizen, or to eliminate the role of the retail or high street bank from the financial system, then there are potentially very significant implications. That could be a consequence of a central bank digital currency.
That bill text is going to be posted this weekend. All of our members will have 72 hours to review it. That's our commitment. That's our rule. We're respecting it. And that's the only reason we need the process CR to allow us time to do that. If I did it the way, I don't know, Speaker Pelosi did, we just drop that bill and vote on it within hours, right? We're not going to do that. We want members to be able to have their review and their say and to see all of that.
House Speaker Mike Johnson a bit earlier today, knowing now that the House has passed a continuing resolution that would keep the government from beginning to shut down tomorrow. It's on its way to the Senate, as we just discussed with Dick Durbin. If you're just joining us, we are waiting for a Senate vote on this evening, and it could happen rather soon, as we now bring in Congresswoman Nicole Malliotakis of New York for the Republican view on things in the House. Congresswoman, it's good to see you. Looks like we've bought a couple of weeks here to get something done. 6 bills by next Friday, and then the following Friday we'll do it all over again. Is that enough time after the difficulty we have seen in getting spending bills passed, or are you gearing up for another CR?
Well, look, I think whatever passes from here on will need to be passed in a bipartisan way. It's how we averted the debt default. It's how we averted the shutdowns, how we passed the Federal Aviation Act, the NDAA for security, and also the extension of the child tax cut in the different provisions. That's how we're going to get anything done out of the House. You're going to see the far right and far left probably vote against a lot of things, as they have been, and you'll see everyone else in the middle, roughly 300 members, vote in support of common sense bipartisanship. I think the biggest problem that we have is there are these members who believe that it's got to be all or nothing, and that's just not the way that business works, government works, life works. You have to give a little to get a little, and what we're seeing is now this compromise that is emerging from the Senate and the House, and we'll see. I think more members are upset, though, about not having as much input into this process. It's kind of come down to the leaders negotiating these individual bills, and then we'll have an opportunity to review it. Yes, we'll have the opportunity to read it, which I think is incredibly important, to know what is in a bill before we vote for it. But I do feel that a lot of members, including myself, do feel that we've been sort of shut out of this process in terms of seeing what we would like to see in these various appropriation bills that we'll be taking up next week.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so if members like yourself are a bit dissatisfied perhaps with the transparency being provided by leadership and Speaker Mike Johnson, and as you mentioned, there are a number of conservatives who are dissatisfied with this another short-term CR that Mike Johnson initially said he did not want to do. Is his speakership in real danger, especially if he's going to be passing bipartisan bills that don't necessarily sit well with, say, the House Freedom Caucus?
Well, look, I don't think it should be. I think the reality is we're going to have this issue regardless of who the speaker is. There will be a group of people who will never be satisfied because we have to negotiate with the Senate. And what they need to recognize is that Republicans control just the House, and we control the House by just 2 votes. And so we need, if we're only 1/3 of the government, to actually work as best as we can with the Senate and the White House. We should fight for our priorities. We should continue to fight for serious provisions to get this border secured. We should fight for fiscal sanity. We should fight for the extension of our, tax credits that were very important under the Trump administration, that stimulated the economy, that brought us to 50-year low unemployment, lifted wages, and helped businesses invest. We should fight for all those priorities, and we need to, right? And we're doing that on behalf of the American people. But at some point, you have to recognize we're not going to get everything that we want. We have to take some of the things that the Senate's going to want, which we may not like, and we're going to have to give up some. But we should continue to fight as much as we can and as hard as we can to try to get real results for the American people. And like I said, you're going to see the far right and far left vote against anything that comes to the floor. And that's why it's going to rest on the 300 of us in the middle that hopefully will be able to come to an agreement here and support what the final product is.
Well, we talked about the border issue with your colleague from South Carolina, Congressman Ralph Norman. He joined us right around this time yesterday, talking about the border and the difficulty the House has had to address this. Here's what he said.
We're continually stressing to Mike that under any agreement ought to be firm metrics to stop the border hemorrhaging that's occurring. And we can't keep going with letting everybody from over 160 countries come into America.
Are you sending that same message to the Speaker as Congressman Norman is, or do you regret not having this Senate compromise come to the floor in the House?
Well, the Senate compromise does not do the job. What it does is it has an automatic shutdown if you average 5,000 individuals over a week, but then it's up to the president a discretion to how long that border is closed. So if the president has authorities right now that he's not using to secure the border, what makes us think that he would use any additional discretion? The difference between the Senate bill and the House bill that we passed in May that Schumer won't allow for a vote is that our bill actually requires the president to do all these things: reinstate remain in Mexico, end catch and release. It makes them address the asylum issue, parole. Though we cannot give the president more discretion. He already has discretion. In fact,
you just said it, though, that the middle's got to decide this, right, Congresswoman? I mean, Jim Lankford is a serious conservative. I think you would agree. I suspect that you appreciate the professionalism of Chris Murphy, not to mention Kirsten Sinema coming at this all from different angles. How's it going to get better than this? This is what so many lawmakers have been asking for, isn't it?
Well, I guess what the House believes is if the Senate truly wants funding as their number one priority is funding for Ukraine and Taiwan and Israel, we can match that with H.R. 2, our Border Security Act, which is our number one priority. We can give a little on H.R. 2, but certainly we want something passed that's actually going to do the job. For me to pass something that's just going to simply give the president more discretion that he's not going to use doesn't really work, because right now he has executive authorities under Title 1182 and 1225 that he can use today. That's what President Trump used to secure the border. Unfortunately, the current president used it to dismantle the border, and that is what we're seeing taking place right now.
Well, your Republican colleague in the House has, Brian Fitzpatrick, is leading an effort to have a slimmed-down package, would be defense only, get out some of the humanitarian aid, have a border component in it. Is that something, Congressman, you could get behind? Would you sign on to a discharge petition to get that on the floor if he were to put it forward?
Well, I'm actually reviewing that proposal now. It seems to be a better plan than what the Senate has put forward. I want to make sure that it actually does the job and secures the border. I think it is really what the Republicans in the conference have been talking about. They want to focus on military aid, not humanitarian aid. And so if we can focus on the military foreign aid and couple it with real border security solutions that are actually going to stem the flow, then I think it will work. So I'm reviewing that right now, and I've been speaking with Brian Fitzpatrick about it. So what's happening right now is just obviously unsustainable. And I think there's other issues as well that should be addressed, right? We do want to have more visas so people can come legally to satisfy employers' needs, have family-sponsored visas as well. I think those are areas, adding more judges to deal with the backlog. But none of it matters if we don't actually stem the flow right now. We should never be encouraging people to pay thousands of dollars to be smuggled over our southern border at the hands of the drug cartels. Nobody benefits from that. Absolutely no one. So we can do it in a better way, but we have to stem the flow.
Well, and Congresswoman, finally, as I know that the immigration border issue is very close to you in New York, given what New York City is experiencing, just a final question on New York. Now that the redistricting map has been finalized, how do you feel about it?
Well, my district stays the same, so I'm happy about that. I was disappointed when the Democrats sued to try to get the independently drawn map removed, but it seemed that the process overall worked out and everyone seems to be satisfied knowing that at least they have a competitive seat. I mean, that's all we've asked for. We just wanted to have a fair race. We believe we can win on merit, on debate, on policy, as we did in 2022. And so I think overall, we survived this process once again, but it should have been left alone after the court appointed a special master. You couldn't get any more independent than that, and the map shouldn't have remained. I think the bigger issue in New York is that Democrats have caused so much destruction that they're afraid of their reelection chances. I mean, that's the reality. All you're seeing right now, from the president's open border policies to the state's bail law to the sanctuary policies of New York City Council that have released individuals back onto our street instead of deporting them if they commit crimes. People are very frustrated right now with the Democratic Party, and rightfully so. And so I think that we'll see the New York Republicans that won in 2022 prevail again this year, and we will be, again, the key to the House keeping the Republican majority.
All right, Republican Congresswoman of New York, Nicole Malliotakis, thank you so much for joining us this evening. Appreciate your time. Now coming up over in the Senate, the race to replace Mitch McConnell as head of the Senate GOP has begun. We'll discuss his potential successors with our political panel next. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio.
The world needs ways to reduce carbon emissions.
ExxonMobil can help. We're working on solutions for our business.
That can also help businesses like yours. Heavy industry with low emissions. Let's deliver.